Good morning. It's a treat to have a little opportunity to teach and to learn with you. And this morning we're looking at a psalm that I've entitled Glorious Partnership. And it's one that gives me delight. It's a psalm with a little bit of a different feel than the first 7 that we looked at, in that the first 7 deal with attention. Drama needs attention. And the first 7, in different ways, each distinctively, addresses this tension of the righteous Psalter, knowing that the world has evil, that the world has plotters, and how do you maintain faith in the nature of faith in God in the midst of the tension of evil plotters. This morning, there's a hint of that, but this psalm, Psalm 8, has a very different focus. This psalm focuses on both God's majesty of creation, but even more on the power that God has given to humans. If you will, humans as one of the most extraordinary aspects, the most extraordinary aspect of creation itself. This psalm, like the ones before, in the Hebrew is more evocative of certain literary structure and patterns, repetition of words. So this morning, I'm going to read in Hebrew and then in English. And as I do so, I'm going to try and evoke. One second. I'm going to try and evoke some of that symmetry. So let me just point out, even before I begin to read, the word what or how in Hebrew, ma, punctuates this particular psalm. You'll see it in verse 2, ma adir shemcha, how glorious, how majestic is your name. And then verse 5, it's going to use that same evocative word ma, but now focused on humanity. Ma enosh ki tizkarenu. How or what are humans that you are mindful of them? And it'll return to this key word ma in verse 10. Ma adir shemcha, back to God. How glorious, how majestic is your name. The other thing to note is the repetition of verses 2 and 10. How Adonai, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, whose splendor you set above the heavens. But there's a journey from verse 2 to 10. And although the verse repeats, it has a different resonance by the time the Psalter returns to it. Another key repetitive word is the word ma'aseh, your doings, the work. You'll find that in verse 4 and in verse 7. But again, a shift from verse 4, it refers to God, and in verse 7, that same word, the doings, ma'aseh, refers to human hands. And so there's this back and forth throughout this beautifully crafted psalm between God and humanity, and the power of God, the glorious power, and the empowering of man. I will add that for the Vilna Gaon, who was, his name literally means the genius of Vilna, who lived in Lithuania in the 18th century, he said this particular psalm, Psalm 8, should be the psalm of Simchat Torah, the celebration of the Torah. So I have 2 questions just to put in the back of your mind as I now read the psalm. Why of all the psalms do you think the Vilna Gaon would have said, this should be read for Simchat Torah? And the second question, we'll leave the last 10 minutes as well for, and that is, what's evoked for you? With that, I'm going to read today the Hebrew and the English, and then talk about some of the commentaries, kind of the fine tune reading, and hopefully we'll have 10 minutes at the end for an exchange of reactions to Psalm 8. Limanatseach al gitit mizmor David, for the lead player upon the gitit, the Psalm of David. Adonai Adonenu ma'adir shimcha b'chol haaretz, asher tenahodcha al hashamayim. Adonai, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, whose splendor you set above the heavens. Mepi olalim v'yomkim, from out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, yisarata oz, you have founded strength. Leman sorerecha lashbit oyev umidnat kim, on account of your foes, that you might still the enemy and the avenger. Ki shamecha, when I behold your heavens, ma'aseh etzbotecha, the work of your fingers, yareach v'kochavim asher konanta, the moon and the stars that you set in place. Ma enosh ki tizkerenu, what are humans that you are mindful of them? Uven adam ki tifkedenu, and mortals that you have taken note of them. V'tachserehu ma'at me Elohim, you have made them but lower than the divine. V'chavod v'hadar ta'atrehu, and with honor and glory you have crowned them. V'tamshilehu b'maaseh yadecha, you have made them masters of your hands. Kol shata tachat raglav, you have placed all under their feet. Soneh v'alafim kulam v'gam bahamot sadai, sheep and oxen, all of them, and also the beasts of the field. Sipur shemaim udgei hayam, the fowl of the heavens or the air, udgei hayam, and the fish of the sea, over ochot yamim, which pass through the currents of the seas. Adonai Adonenu, Adonai our Lord. Ma'adir shimcha, how glorious is your name. B'chol haaretz, in all the earth. Now, in past weeks, I've kind of spent maybe a little bit more time on the introductory verse. Here, the question is, what's a gitit? This is a mizmor al hagitit. And in that regard, it can be either on or about, the word al. So some say this is on another musical instrument, the gitit, which Alter would say is unknown. But others would parse gitit as a name. So, for instance, Meiri, an important commentator of Catalonia, Spain, and then France, he identified the gitit as the Holy Ark, because the person who stored the ark in 2 Samuel 6, his name is Oved Adom Giti. And therefore, the prompt for this is what's evoked by the gift, if you will, of the Holy Ark, the gift of God entrusting humans with revelation. Another possibility of Samson Raphael Hirsch is that a gat is a wine press, as in Isaiah 63:3, and therefore human potential is only revealed like with a wine press, with the juices squeezed out, the human and divine partnership of the wine press. So bottom line, the verse of Gitit is unclear if it's a musical instrument or, as we'll see in other psalms, a prompt of a moment or a theme. And then you have, again, verses 2 and 10. It can be viewed as an envelope or as a beginning comes full circle to see the beginning with greater power. Verse 3, from out of the mouths of babes and sucklings. Let me spend a moment with this verse. We know that line, out of the mouth of babes come wisdom. Here it's out of the mouths of babes and suckling, you have founded strength. So what comes out of the mouths of babe and sucklings? One possibility is dependency. that humans are created with enormous potential that's unrealized. Abraham Joshua Heschel said one of the great miracles or mysteries of life is when you look at a newborn, you don't know the potential that will yet unfold. If this will be a human who will create a melody like a Mozart that will transcend generations, or this will be a mother who will nurture love in the world. The potential of humans, Heschel points out, is unlike that of animals generally, which are products of instinct. One more thought in that regard. What comes out of the mouths of babes and sucklings are words. And that brings me to Genesis and the creation story that points out the uniqueness of human beings. There's that famous line, Genesis 2:7, Vayetzer Adonai Elohim et Adam, and the ever-present one, God, fashioned from the earth, fashioned Adam, afar min ha'adamah, from the dust of the earth, v'yapach ba'apav, and God breathed into his nostrils, nishmat chayim, the breath of life, v'hi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and it was to man a living being. Now, that line is where we get the image of a human being being the vessel for God's breath, for divine spirit, for consciousness that we each hold within us uniquely, nishmat chayim. This appears only here, this image of not for anything else in creation, that we hold this divine breath. Interestingly, the Aramaic translator, Unclus, of the Bible, he translated lenefesh chaya, which is often understood as to be a living being, as leruach mimala'ah, as a speaking spirit. That what gives humans uniqueness is the ability to speak. And so the mouths of babes and sucklings, you have found its strength. That it's the human capacity that you have created, God, with the ability of speech that enables this uniqueness of power that will then unfold in the psalm. One commentator did link 3 to 9, and I'll point out another symmetry. 9, the ending is fish, and you can have the image of fish. I love this image I learned, fish, in terms of the mouth moving. And so it opens also with the mouth and closes with the mouth in a different way. Though what you will see also is a movement in this description from heavens and God in the heavens to earth, to the sea animals, and then to the water. So there's also a visual movement of creation in the psalm. And then there's a shift in verse 3, on account of your foes, that you might still the enemy and the avenger. Here, there's a movement from the babe to an adult power of the ability to fight. And ultimately, that is also part of what it means to be human, to move from, if you will, dependency to one's strength. And now verse 4 and verse 7 create, if you will, a sandwich. Verse 4 talks about God's ma'asim. Verse 7 is ma'aseh yadecha, and that God has given to man the ability to control the work of God's hands. So verse 4 and 7, then I'll come to 5 and 6. When I behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have set in place. And the commentators point on, instead of being the work of your hands, here it's etzbotecha, your fingers, in that when we look up at the heavens, it's an intricate tapestry. And it's as if God had finely woven the stars in the sky. And so therefore, the fingers, the tapestry, the handiwork is presented. And now verse 7, you have made them masters, meaning humans, over the works of your hands. All you have planted under their feet. And the image of placing things under the feet is a Near Eastern phrase, according to Jonathan Alter, throughout the Near East for subjugation. So a ruler is perceived as on the throne and all is at the ruler's feet. This, again, this image of humanity given royal-like powers, all is placed under human feet. And then in the middle, verses 5 and 6. This is a line we have. Verse 5 is part of our high holiday liturgy. What are humans that you are mindful of them, and mortals that you have taken note of them? And again, that's linked to 4, where we're looking up at God, wowed by God's power, and saying, God, with all that power, how is it that you are mindful of we who are but creatures? And then verse 6 and 5 and 6 have this tension from creatureliness in 5 to 6, power. Yet you have made them but little lower than the divine. The word v'techasrehu means lacking only a little from Elohim. Elohim is often translated as the angels. It can be from the powers of the world. A translation is the divine. And you have crowned them, again, that symbol, the crown of royalty, with honor and glory. You have made them masters over the works of your hands. So the very center of this psalm deals with God empowering humans. Although we are but creatures, we are created in the image of God, the ability to speak, the ability to manipulate nature. And so 2 closing thoughts before I turn it over for your reflection. 3 thoughts. One is it builds to a repetition of verse 2 to verse 10. Adonai, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. But this time it's humans who are saying it. It's more conscious that you have given humans royal-like powers, and we use our mindfulness, our words, to praise God. In that sense, from verse 2 to verse 10, there's a journey of knowing our own power and using it to extol God. Back to Abraham Joshua Heschel, he said that the greatest human capacity is that of wonder, and that in wonder, in awe, in seeing the world, that is when we are able to reach beyond the physical, to acknowledge this dimension of a mindful creator that emerges not intellectually, but from the wow of seeing the world, which again is that description of verses 2 and 10. How majestic is your name on the earth. And last, a closing story that many of you may know. And it's of Simcha Bunim, the great Hasidic master, who said that he had 2 pieces of paper, and these would help him in his life. And on one paper it said, you are but dust and ashes, afar va'afar. And he said, I would pull out that paper when I would feel full of myself. I would remember my mortality, my creatureliness. But in the other pocket, I would pull out the quote that's saying that the world was created for you, or if you will, as here, I am created in the image of God. And then I would pull that out when I would feel lonely and feel my own limitations. I would remember I was created in the image of God. And so those 2 tensions are beautifully expressed in Psalm 8. I find that in these 10 verses, there is much that is said, and said very differently than in the first 7 Psalms. Hence my title, Glorious Partnership, that this psalm reminds us of the glory of creation, and that it is a partnership between the Creator and we who are creatures have been empowered with mind, with language, with the capacity of wonder to be God's partner. So with that, we have 10 minutes. I invite you to unmute yourself to share just one idea so as to enable a number of sharings. Go right ahead.
I'll go ahead. You hear me or?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Glenn.
I was going to say that this psalm it's terrific. You know, it's much more unified than the others which we have read, and it has a statement, just the first stanza, about how great God is. But then it's about humans. We're just a little lower. That's the wonderful. You know, we're not lower, but just a little lower than the divine, which is a very uplifting thought in this. And also, I want to say hi to Julia. I'm so happy to see her. So happy to see her. Okay, that's my statement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to emphasize the one piece that grabs me in what you just shared, and I thank you. And that's this word in verse 6, ma'at. V'tachasirehu ma'at me Elohim. To emphasize that insight, Glenn, you have made me, ma'at means just a little, ma'at, just a little less than Elohim. And again, Elohim can either be God, right? That's one of the names for God. It's a name sometimes for any beings with power, angels, even judges. But it implies this elevation of human capacity, just a little bit lower. Another reaction.
Yes, I have a reaction. It's Mimi.
Go ahead, Mimi.
Okay, in verse 3, you were talking about from the mouths of babes and sucklings as dependency. I think there's also innocence. It's the innocence of the babes, and that adds an additional dimension.
That's beautiful.
Reaction.
Thank you, Mimi. And others have pointed that out also. So you have an insight that echoes across generations, that God created humanity to be pure, to be innocent at the outset, is one of the interpretations here. And that contrasts with the second half in terms of you're going to have to get wise because it's a dangerous world and you're going to have enemies. So there's a tension between the innocence and the need for strength to respond to danger in that same verse. Other reactions in terms of something that grabbed you in this psalm? Julia, and then Jennifer.
I guess, I feel like it's very congratulatory of human power. And I would want to read the image carefully.
Julia, you're going to have to speak up a little bit louder into the mic.
I have this one on.
Oh,
is that
good.
better?
Yes.
I feel like it's very congratulatory of human power, and that we need to read the psalm carefully for checks on human power, because we have made a mess of this creation. And so I think that element of wonder and of partnership and kind of ending with God, that we have to remind ourselves of our responsibilities and obligations and the dangers of our capacities.
Thank you. That's well said in terms of the structure of the psalm, meaning there's a building, the center of the psalm is empowerment, human empowerment, and a sense of wonder over that human empowerment. And yet where it leads is to wonder that we are, or to say we are not God. It ends like Larry Kushner, who defines the first of the 10 commandments is, I am God and you are not. And does end with that reminder as the opening and the closing. Jennifer.
I was just wondering the actual numeric placement of the psalm. It's number 8, which is a transitional day, isn't it? I mean, the mention of babes, that's when you're circumcised on the 8th day. And I'm not sure exactly how to express it, but the idea I remember when I went to my nephew's circumcision, they said when the baby cries, it's like a trumpet, and bring your prayers up with the trumpet, you know, the cry. And so I'm not that he's crying out, but I just sense there's something to do with the numerical placement. That's all.
So let me build on that, Jennifer. You know, for rabbinic commentators, particularly in the Bible, numerology or numbers is a very important symbol in itself. It's a concentrated symbol. So how many times a word gets repeated, for instance, often has a significance numerically. And like you say, Jennifer, this psalm is a departure from the first 7. In that sense, feels like a new beginning, which is identified rabbinically with the number 8, and maybe even biblically. So a little to expand on that, the first 7 psalms were all about, like in the first psalm, this struggle between the righteous and the wicked, and not being tempted by their counsels. That's the key theme. Here, it's a departure, and if you will, it's a celebration of the gift of life, or beginnings, new beginnings. And in the rabbinic counting, 8 marks covenant and new beginnings. So I'll circle back. And that may be also why for the Vilna Gaon, this is Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is our celebration of starting over, of new beginnings, and more. The gift of Torah, which is a love letter from God traditionally, that we are uniquely empowered to read, that we gain access to God through Torah. It's our bridge to God. And on Simchat Torah, we start over the reading. And there is an element here, to your comment, Jennifer, of babes, of birth, creation, and the number 8 of new beginnings. One last closing comment does anybody have, and then I'll pull this together. So without a hand going up and a button to go, let me pull this together. It is a relief to take a break from the 7 Psalms and their struggle with the wicked. You know, we live in a moment where we know there is danger in the world that we as a people are collectively trying to respond to. And in that sense, we are aware in this moment that human capacity is how we respond to the threat of a coronavirus. Or as one person said, and I've quoted it now numerous times, the answer to our prayers is science. Namely, the answer to our prayers is the human capacity to solve a physical problem. How do you respond to this coronavirus, to COVID-19? And this psalm is empowering. It says, I made you little less than the gods, the divine, than myself, giving you the power to be masters over the works of your hands. And as a religious people, this is I think, a powerful psalm to both be reminded of the intricacy of the world, that creation is good but not perfect, and to help perfect creation requires our best human capacities, a gift of the divine to solve a problem, and yet to know with humility also in this moment of our creatureliness, that we've been driven indoors by nature. And that quality of being reminded of our creatureliness too is so much a moment that we are in. Those qualities are reflected in Psalm 8. And so as we move to Pesach redemption, which is only on the 7th day, which is tonight and tomorrow, it's only on the 7th day do you cross the Sea of Reeds to freedom. On the Seder, you're given permission to leave the next morning, but we only leave tomorrow. And so we're still on a journey. And may Psalm 8 be a valuable resource as we continue our march to freedom, as we continue our march as humanity toward freedom of another kind. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to resume next week with 3 days a week, only because I'm really enjoying this opportunity to learn and to teach. And I want to see how many Psalms I can do with you. And we're creating a portfolio. So there is all the Psalms now on our website, on our archive. You need a code now, which I'm told is 181818, 3 times, to access the first 7 Psalms to gain those sharings. Thank you. Each of you make me happy to see you. Modim l'simcha. May you have a good remaining Pesach.